Well, Riley here. I see people do story times on TikTok and on Instagram or whatever, so I thought I would try my hand at my very first story time. And my story time is about how I got my first speeding ticket before I had my driver's license, and I didn't pay it, and I guess you could kind of say I got away with it. So to set the stage, we've got to back up just a little bit. As many of you know, my father died just before I turned 11 years old. In a very early age, my mother was allowing me to drive the family car. By the time I was about 13, I was driving the 1964 Chrysler New Yorker that my parents had owned for many years. The short distance from our house to the corner store and whatnot, typically with my mother in the car, but there were a couple of occasions she just let me go on my own. And so about a year after my father died, that car was really in bad shape, had a bunch of miles on it. So my mother traded it in and got something very similar to this. This is a 1973 Dodge Polara Custom, only hers, instead of being in this color, was in the baby blue. Have you seen that police car, baby blue or blue color? I think it was in like Hill Street Blues and some of those shows. They had the police cars in that color. Well, her car was pretty close to that color from the factory, but it wasn't exactly that. And she bought the car brand new. It was a demonstrator. But anyway, the car was a pretty miserable automobile. You never knew if it was going to start, and it had hundreds of dollars of work done on it, I think every year that she owned it. And I'm quite sure that some of the mechanics and stuff got to her. But anyway, the bottom line was the car got so unreliable, and the only person that could kind of make it start was me. So I wound up driving the car most of the time and chauffeuring my mom around. And that was about the time I was maybe 14 and a half to 15, something like that. So when I was 15 years old, I got a job at Henry Courts West End Texaco in Beaumont, Texas, which is kind of in the part of town where people with with money live. And we had a lot of nice cars that came in there, a lot of muscle cars and luxury cars and things like that, because Beaumont was an oil and refinery town, and there was and is still quite a bit of money there. So anyway, I worked for Henry Courts West End Texaco. It was the summer of 1978, and it was a little bit past my 16th birthday, and I've been driving myself and my mother to work consistently, but I didn't have a driver's license. And so I was working for the Texaco station, and late one summer afternoon, they needed me to go to the salvage yard out on Highway 90 and pick up a part and bring it back to them. It was a pretty urgent thing to get a customer's car out. But I also had the problem of picking my mother up from work at the nursing home at 3 o'clock. And so the intrepid young soul that I was, I hopped in that old Dodge Polara, and I started heading out Highway 90. And on the way out there, I'm sure I hit triple-digit speeds. And I got to the salvage yard, and I picked up the part. I can't even remember what it was. I think it may have been for like a 1973 Mustang II, maybe a starter or an alternator or something like that. I don't know. Anyway, got back, or started heading back to the gas station, and I got just about 2 miles from the salvage yard, and guess what? DPS lit me up and pulled me over. And there I was, no driver's license. I was 16 years old, driving my mother's car, and late to pick her up from work at 3 o'clock. So the DPS officer was relatively understanding, but he did write me a ticket, and he could have told me to park the car, but he told me to take it home and don't drive it anymore after explaining the circumstances. So anyway, go and pick my mother up from work. So now I have a speeding ticket, and I don't have a driver's license. So what do? So I went down to JP Court. I was always kind of a ballsy kind of kid. So I went down to JP Court and asked to see the judge, and I sat down in his office. And I can't remember his name, but he was an older gentleman. This, as I said, would have been 1978, and I would say he was probably in his 60s or 70s. Seemed old to me at the time anyway. So we sat down and talked, and I explained the circumstances. And I told him, or he actually asked me, what went on, and I told him, well, my father had passed away a number of years before, and this was the only car the family had, that I was working and helping my mother, and we shared the car, and I had to take her back and forth to work. And quite honestly, I hadn't had anybody to take me down to the driver's license office to get my license. Back in those days, the rumor was that they would ask if you were underage or if you didn't have your license yet, if somebody drove you down there. And I was afraid that I would go down there and then they would somehow ban me from getting my license. But anyway, the judge was very understanding, and what he said was, son, go ahead and go down there and get your license and then come back and talk. And I made arrangements to do that pretty quickly. I asked my cousin to drive me down there, and on the day something happened and she couldn't do it. And so I just kind of took my life into my hands, and once again, jumped in the trusty Dodge Polara and off to the driver's license office I went. And there was a very tough lady working there named Mrs. Birdsong, who I got to know pretty well later on through some friend connections. But anyway, she was the lady, the gatekeeper there, and she was very formidable. But anyway, I got in the car with the trooper, and we went driving, and it was all going pretty well. And we're going down the road, and the trooper had a chaw in, and believe it or not, in those days that was not that uncommon. So we're going down the road, and he opened the door and spit out his chaw. And I looked over. So anyway, up to that point, the test had been going really, really well. So we got back, and I got my score, and it was like a 90 or something like that. Anyway, he counted points off for inattention because I watched him when he opened the door, and I thought, well, that's only common sense to prevent somebody from falling out of the car. But anyway, so the bottom line was I got my driver's license that day. Oh, there was one other thing that I discovered, is that I had the glasses just like I do now, but those glasses were at that point several years out of date, and I have an acute astigmatism in my right eye, and I looked through that little thing and I couldn't see nothing, okay? So what I did was I closed my right eye, and guess what? I could see both sides. So I passed the vision test, got my license, hot-footed it back down to the courthouse to go to see the JP, and showed him the license and everything, and he dismissed all of it. I didn't have to pay the ticket, there was no fine, there were no consequences, and I didn't even have to tell my mother. So it all worked out pretty well for me. So that is the story of how I got my first speeding ticket before I got my driver's license, and how I got out of it without telling my mother, all driving that crappy, almost new 1973 Dodge Polara.